Hello watch enthusiasts. Now today I have a product which I've been looking forward to receiving for over a month from the brand Xezo. And this is a brand for whom I've reviewed watches previously, notably an Air Commander from this very range, but in a blacked out finish with a Miyota movement. And that was a very interesting watch in terms of offering something different to the market, but I didn't feel offered as much value as, for example, models from Xezo, or indeed other competitors around that price range, for example Steinhardt. However, this is a timepiece which I've been looking forward to because I feel this is a piece which, whilst providing excellent quality and Swiss-made build, offers something which is a true hybrid between a diver's watch and a pilot's watch without any inconvenience within that range. And before I begin the video, I would like to say that obviously this week we have SIHH 2018, which is of course a show during which we're going to see many new releases from the Richemont Group and various independents at the higher price ranges. And don't worry, I will review those, or at least review the week in terms of releases at the weekend with 2 videos on the Sunday. So don't worry about that. And I also do have a glycine review coming up of this vintage piece, which I am looking forward to producing in the next few weeks. But back to the job at hand, because this watch is something which I must admit I am extremely intrigued by. And it comes in this wooden box, which is a lacquered wooden box. It's quite nice quality really, but the true value of this watch comes in the build of the watch, where I feel they've poured the vast majority of their resources with regards to the pricing of this timepiece. And the box opens simply like so to reveal the watch itself, which is a piece which I feel is extremely well built, having worn it for a few weeks now, and indeed extremely well designed in terms of offering a quality of finishing and indeed a feature set which is frankly unbelievable for the price range. And before I begin this video, I would of course, as always, like to stress that I'm not being paid to produce this video at all. I've produced this video because I was contacted by the brand saying that they would be interested in a review if I would be interested to take a look at one of these watches if it was sent over to me, and then produce a review of it if it was to my standards. And so as a result, from the start, this was very much a process which was conceived in order to try the watch out and genuinely establish if it was of high quality. And I've been extremely impressed by it in terms of its features. I've used it quite extensively over the past week and a half now, and I must say it's performed extremely well. Also, it has surprised me in terms of its comfort on the wrist. But I must stress that I'm not being paid to produce this review, and there really isn't any bias in that respect, because as you know, I'm a great supporter of other brands at this price range, such as Zinn and Damasco in terms of what they produce. But I felt this watch was worthy of being shown because it offers something different to a consumer who wants a slightly different package as far as a watch goes, with a brand which is highly keen to disclose where they produce these watches and by whom, as this has been a problem with a lot of these smaller brands, that they won't disclose the manufacturing of these watches. Which leads to a bit of an ambiguous sort of situation with buyers, whereas here you can actually contact the factory in Switzerland which produces these watches with no real problems whatsoever. Now the sizing of this watch is by no means small, and so we have a 44mm case which features a 45mm bezel with as you can see, a slight lip which overhangs, which allows the grip of the bezel to be all the better. It's 54mm from lug to lug, but again that's deceptive because the lugs curve down quite significantly. And its thickness is 16mm, which is substantial, but as I explain further about this watch in the video, you may see the reasons why actually this works very well for a watch of this type, and why actually I wouldn't want this watch to be 13 or 12mm thick, because it would make the controls of this watch difficult to operate. Up front we have a highly anti-reflective sapphire crystal which is flat, which as you can see allows you to read it really in the most significant of angles, which remains legible. Additionally, the bezel isn't ceramic, but rather it's black. This black painted surface, this black steel insert, which has these diamond cut indices, which actually protrude from the surface, as you can see, like that, which give a fantastic texture and give some real shape to this watch. Whilst there is a large lume pip at 12 o'clock, which I will show you later on in the full lume shot of this watch. And as you can see, the case is entirely stainless steel, from the brushed tops to the lugs, as well as those areas between the lugs, to the polished sides of the case and these parts around the bezel, which of course frame that wonderful steel insert with those diamond polished and cut indices on that matte black base. We do then see this style of black and white continued around the pushers and crown, where, as you can see, if I can just get that clearly into focus, because they do sit slightly below the bezel, we have a PVD coating on the pushers and crown. And I appreciate this because it would be very easy for a lot of brands to produce watches with a lot of PVD and steel for added visual impact. But I must admit, I personally find that PVD peels off if it's on obviously susceptible areas of the watch, such as the sides, the top of the case, or indeed other areas. So I appreciate the fact they've put them in for visual interest, and also they do add to a degree of the grip on these aspects of the watch, without being a problem in terms of wear. Then the dial is this very attractive matte black, which may appear blue as a result of the light, but it is very clearly matte black when you look at it in normal daylight. And this features indices running from 1 to 11, or rather numerals, with indices at 12, 3, 6 and 9, which are applied with these wonderful polished edges, which are also faceted to match the hands. As well as this, we have a very similar application of steel around those subdials, which gives added detail and an added perception of value to this watch, when a lot of watches simply go for an applied feature on the dial in order to appear a more military style. But this watch retains legibility with this reverse panda dial, with those white subdials and very classical layout, but nonetheless whilst providing you with legibility which is excellent. Then the hands are these very typical pilot's hands, which feature these elongated tips, which make them very legible in the day, though I must say during the night, and I will show you in the Lume shot, it's more difficult to tell the minute hand from the hour hand, simply because they're comparable lengths, though I must say at any setup or any position other than being opposite each other, they are quite easily seen from each other, though I must say that would be a change I would make to this watch if I were to redesign it. Now, not all the indices are applied, but rather are painted, so the numerals are painted, along with the numerals on the subdials, which are sunken beneath the rest of the dial on other flat planes, which help to break up the surface of the dial and prevent it from appearing like too large a surface area of this watch. And in many ways it's the touches on this watch that make the timepiece appear so attractive, and indeed help to break up the size of the watch and make it appear smaller on the wrist. For example, that red automatic text, which is of course taken over from something like a Rolex Daytona, with that typical style of writing which has become so iconic. But nonetheless, I feel that they've done a very good job of making this watch visually interesting, with Xezo and Air Commando over that day date indicator, which is painted white, as is the case on the standard date wheels of the movement. However, we do have white framing around that, which do assist in providing a greater legibility and a clarity, which gives a symmetry to the watch, as you can see, because you have the white on both sides of the dial, top and bottom, and left and right, which does make the watch a piece which I think is very well designed, and in many ways has design which is more interesting than some other brands competing at this price range. Notably, models from Damasco, for instance, I feel don't appear as lustrous as this watch, or indeed as clear, as far as being a nice hybrid between a luxurious timepiece and an out-and-out sports watch. If the watch is flipped over, we see this heavily domed caseback with, again, a sapphire crystal, through which you can see the Bezel 7750 movement, which is a very run-of-the-mill movement as far as standards go, but the quality of this movement has been so far extremely good, with an accuracy of about +4 seconds I've found. Xezo declared +6 for this watch, after testing it in 3 positions, which is the standard for these watches, but I'm getting about +4 I've found. And as you can see, the rotor is decorated, whilst the rest of the movement is left plain, which is an area which could have been decorated a bit further, but nonetheless I think that this isn't at all an inconvenience. And one thing I will show you whilst we're looking at the caseback is after unscrewing these pushers, which incidentally are screwed in to stop them from moving when underwater, rather than in order to actually waterproof them, because that's simply done by the seals, as is the case with this crown on this side, though I'll talk about that in more detail in a bit. But as you can see, this section is the cam assembly of that chronograph, and when one presses this, it engages, which is an interesting aspect of this watch to witness, and usually something you don't see with these visual-based movements. However, the reason why I feel this watch makes such a tremendous hybrid between a dive watch and a pilot's watch is in the design and indeed the functionality. Because if we look at the diving credentials of this watch, it's water resistant to 990 feet, so 300 meters, with all the necessary legibility you would want with a highly legible luminescent dial, where you have a very luminescent pip on the bezel, as well as those hands, which does add to a functional watch underwater and above water. The bezel is also unidirectional and has no play whatsoever in it, which I was impressed by at this price range, because the price of this watch is normally $1,500, but at present they're running a campaign on Amazon in order to provide this watch for $833 for a limited time. and this is a limited run of 500 pieces, rather than being an out-and-out production model, which does add to the interest of this timepiece. And as I've said, the bezel is easily used and is lacking in any sort of play once aligned. But the strange and curious aspect of this is it's a 90-click bezel, so you have 90 clicks rather than 60 or 120, which is a choice which I'm unsure as to why this was made, but it doesn't seem to affect the use of the watch. And it does have a very positive click on the bezel, which is something I appreciate, whilst the bezel isn't particularly thick, but highly legible due to the contrast between black and silver. There is then a screw-down crown, which screws down about 6 times, which is twice that of the amount of times that my Omega Seamaster's crown screws down, which is a peculiar aspect, and it can be manually wound, as well as having that automatic rotor, as well as it is hacking, as you can see, where the whole movement is halted when one pulls out the crown to its setting position with a quick set date and day. Then, of course, on this side of the case, we don't have a screw-down crown for the internal bezel. And the purpose of the internal bezel is twofold. Either you can line it up with the hour hand after lining up the normal bezel with the minute hand in order to time longer periods of time involving hours, or alternatively, bearing in mind that I'm currently in a time zone which is GMT 00, if I were to go to Central Europe, I could move it to here, which would move my hour hand to 5 o'clock rather than 4 o'clock. Which is a curious addition to this watch and does add to the pilot's aspects of this piece, which are core and central to this watch's purpose as a watch. And we've seen other watches with similar aspects, such as the Diver 1967 from Longines, but that features both of these features on the bezel, which means that you can either use one or the other. You can't use it as an additional timing function, which adds a certain function to this watch which wouldn't otherwise be seen. And the reason why this isn't screwed down, and it isn't screwed down on any of their watches, unlike the main crown, is primarily because it doesn't need to be used in the same way as a crown. So, for example, once on the wrist, as you can see, it would be extremely difficult to access a screw-down crown at this angle, whereas it's actually rather easy once it's strapped to the wrist to adjust that on the fly. And as a result, that's the main purpose. And of course, screw-down crowns aren't necessary in terms of providing water resistance, but rather they prevent the crown from moving around, which is an added function, but bearing in mind it's very protected, I wouldn't imagine this would be an inconvenience. Now on the wrist, the watch is a deceptive piece, because at 16mm thick it should be far too large for my wrist, which is 6 3/4 inches, or 6.5 inches depending on the weather. And because of that domed rear case back, the watch actually sinks into the wrist very nicely and thus provides only about 12 or 13mm of real thickness, which means it's actually on par with, for example, an Omega Seamaster, which isn't a difficult watch to wear. The bezel is also overhanging the case by about 1mm, being 45mm in diameter, which means it's very easy to grip and turn with no trouble whatsoever. Then the pushers, because they're elevated off the wrist, can easily be screwed and unscrewed without any real difficulty, and then can be used with ease. Then on the opposite side of the case, we can quite easily access this other crown, which, as you can see, because of its height off the wrist, isn't difficult to use, which is something I originally believed with this design, because of that style of watch, and the fact that it is difficult to get hold of a crown on the opposite side of the case. And from the perspective of the lug-to-lug distance of 54mm, I would again normally say no to a size of watch like this, because it would protrude over the wrist. But because it's elevated in this way, you can see that actually it doesn't fit badly at all, and in many ways circles my wrist very nicely, with the correct circumference of curve in order to be able to reach around the wrist and allow that anchor point for the 22mm bracelet end to fit very nicely, and not have the issue of a lot of bracelets where they drop straight off, whereas here there is still a curve, which helps enormously in terms of anchoring the watch on the wrist and preventing it from moving around. And so on the wrist, I feel this watch is really fine for any wrist over about 6.5 inches. Whilst those with smaller wrists might have trouble, I think it is worthwhile trying this watch with a 6.5 inch wrist, because it seems to work extremely well and has been very comfortable over the past 2 weeks I've been testing it. And here is the watch in the dark, and as you can see, the legibility is very, very good, with highly legible green lume on the hands and on the indices on the dial, with the applied indices and the painted ones offering really a comparable sort of legibility. The pip on the bezel is also highly legible, as you can see, and is easily used as well, whilst you can also see the smaller chapter ring bezel, which rotates freely, as you can see. Now, there's negligible lume on the second hand for the chronograph, and none on the rest of the subdials, which is fairly standard for this sort of watch, though again it would have been very nice to see this. I must say for this price range I can't complain. And I know that I keep on coming back to the price range of this watch, but I am flabbergasted by the fact they're able to produce this watch for this price range in a way which is impressive for a Swiss timepiece. Because most chronographs with this movement start at around £1,000 without any of the features this watch has, and so a watch offered with all these specifications for the price of £1,100 is frankly unheard of. And now that I've turned the lights back on, I will conclude this video by simply saying that I'm extremely impressed with this piece in terms of the options and features offered by a piece at a price range which simply isn't accessible usually. And this is the only watch, indeed at this price range, or really throughout the price ranges, with this sort of value to quality ratio, whilst combining pilot's features with a very complete diving package. And I'd like to hear your opinions in the comments down below as to what you think of this watch, and also whether you think that a watch can be larger in these sizes in order to fulfill a particular technical purpose. And so I'll conclude the video here, but thank you very much for watching, and please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel and to be able to enjoy more videos here in future. So thank you very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, over and out.